record on this computer. G'day guys, how you going? It is Kel Humphries and Holly Ann Martin from Safe for Kids Australia. We are here for Talk and Tell with Holly and Kel. My name is Kelly Humphries. I'm an author, speaker and survivor of child sexual abuse. And we are coming to you today with a heart to empower, protect and educate families and kids on how to be safe. But we are going to talk about some tough stuff. Before we get into it though, I just want to let you know everything that I say is my own opinion. It is my own experience and coming from the heart of a survivor and completely separate from anything I do outside of Kelly Humphries right here, right now with you. So I'll just hand over to Holly so she can introduce herself and we'll get cracking on today's content.
Hi, I'm Holly Ann Martin, Managing Director of Safe for Kids, and I teach a child abuse prevention program, so to empower parents and teachers to teach kids how to keep themselves safe. So really proud to be working with Cal.
Yeah, it's exciting, and we've had some big conversations already. So we've already covered, you know, sexual violence and consent, and some really big issues around that, which I've found to be quite. I mean, a lot comes up. You know, like I'm a survivor myself, so I look into it, and I actually am learning a lot about things that I haven't even talked about. So these conversations are bold, they're off the cuff, and even though we're pre-recording this video, I'm going to tell you right now, there's no edits in this, there's no cuts, there's no paste. It is what it is. And we're coming to you very authentically. And in that, if you've got comments or thoughts or ideas about what we're saying, would love for you, as soon as you get it, just pop it in the feed, and we're going to respond to those next week. So we pre-record, we'll send this out, and then we're going to go live on this content for you to be able to respond. We may even be able to get a special guest to come in and just sort of fill in some gaps for us, because I'm not a psychologist, I'm a survivor. Okay, I've got a fair bit of knowledge around the signs and the psychological impacts of child sexual abuse, because hey, that's me and I'm okay with that. So I'm going to share with you from a heart of a survivor for things that I experienced, but also things that have been disclosed to me. And again, I'm not going to give names or anything like that, but our experiences as survivors are very similar in our responses, not necessarily what's actually happened to us, but how we respond in our bodies, because we're all designed the same way, but we all have individual and different experiences. And, you know, we often get caught up in the fact that, you know, we have these responses and we have these emotions around what's happened to us as kids or even as adults, and we beat ourselves up for that. We do. We just like, well, why do I feel like that? I shouldn't be so upset or whatever. I just want to encourage you, before you even start, yes, you're probably going to be triggered by this conversation. It is probably going to take you back to a place where maybe you didn't want to go. But as I've said in every video so far, if you are triggered by anything that Holly or myself says, don't be afraid of that. I consider triggers to be an opportunity for your body to respond. Your body's telling you something, something's popping up for you, and it is your moment. Okay, it is your moment to go, hey, what's this about? What's going on? And acknowledge it. And that is how we move through it, and that is how we grow. Okay, if you need to turn this off, we get it, we understand, but do not be afraid of what's coming up for you. This is a safe space. Holly and I are non-judgmental, we get it, but we are going to crack into things like the psychological, physical and emotional signs of child sexual abuse. And Holly, I know we spoke about in our last video that sometimes there just isn't any signs.
Yeah, you know, you know, quite often after workshops and things like that, parents will come up to me and say, look, Holly, you know, I wish I had have known your program when I was a child, because this happened to me. But literally nobody would have known. You know, I was just really good at covering it up. I was a straight A student. I was, you know, to get me out of the house, I was on every committee. I did all these sports and things like that. And there were no indicators. And quite often people want a list, you know, do they wet the bed? Do they do this? But, you know, you'll talk about some of the signs, but that's why education is so important, so that, you know, if kids have got somebody they can talk to about whatever's going on for them is really, really important, because it may be the person. I mean, I know you quite often talk about the person that you spoke to,
Yep.
initially, and I just wish that if you're, when you're a child, if you had have had a safety team, you would have had the strategies to be able to go and tell.
Yeah, and it wasn't that I didn't have a safety team. It's just that I didn't know what to do with what I was experiencing because I didn't have a language around that.
Yeah,
And
that's
so,
exactly.
and that's again, that's why Holly and I are doing this, is to promote conversations that you can have with your families and kids, and to bring about an awareness so that if something does come up, you have the tools and you have the ability to actually report it, to do something about it, or to recognize it early, or whatever it might be. And I'm just going to put this out there. Like my thing is, and I think this is you can't stop child abuse. Okay, we just can't. We can reduce it. We can make it less. We can save some lives, but we can't stop it completely. And that would be like, gosh, a dream come true if we could just be like, line in the sand, that's it, it's never going to happen again. But we know that's not realistic, and so that is why we're doing this, to just reduce those numbers. And people often ask me like, well, how do I stop it? I'm like, and it saddens me because I don't have a proper answer. But what I do say is, I feel like the number one way to prevent child abuse is to have a good connection and a relationship with your child that is safe. And I say that because, again, Holly, as you were just mentioning about having a conversation with your kid, it's when your child feels safe to come to you and say, this is what's happening to me, and they have a language around what's happening to them, that they can explain to you what's happened. So again, knowing the body parts and all that sort of stuff, to say, this person has touched me on my penis. And if they can't say that, then, and feel safe to say that, then that's where it gets hard. And so that's why I believe that the number one prevention of child abuse is a good connection and a good relationship with your child. And so regardless of all the things we're about to talk about, and yes, we're going to give you that list. We're going to explain some of the things on that list. I'm not going to give you every single thing I have written on my website, because we would be here for hours. I've done this in a parent workshop before, and I swear I could be like a 2-day workshop. And so we're going to give you a few things, and then I'll refer you back to my website, to my blogs, because there's just so much information. But again, you can know all of this, and it could still happen. Okay, just because Holly and I are going to say, hey, these are some things to look out for, just because you see this doesn't mean, one, that it is happening, or two, that you're going to stop it because you've seen it. Okay, like it can still happen. And again, sometimes there's no signs, but by having an awareness and a language around it, we may be able to pull it up before it continues, or before it starts, or whatever the case may be. But these are just tools to equip you, to empower you to have those conversations, and maybe, just maybe, you'll be the person that breaks the cycle. And so that's what we're going to do. So did you want to add anything there, Holly, or?
No, I think we should just jump straight into it.
Okay, no worries. So I think the first thing we'll talk about is the psychological signs of abuse. And psychological just means like the emotional responses, I guess, the mental health stuff. So this is stuff we talk about, like depression and anxiety. And I'm sure, Holly, you've spoken to kids all over the world who've disclosed to you, and they've probably disclosed even a number of these types of I would say conditions. And I hate labels. I really, really hate labels, because it's really important to recognize that whatever happens, and I'm saying whatever happens, whether your kid's acting out criminally, whether they're start taking drugs, whether they are yelling and screaming or punching holes in walls, or whatever response they are having is actually completely normal. It is normal because they've experienced a significant trauma, and the result is a coping mechanism. Okay, and yes, it does need intervention, because without intervention, it spirals out of control. So looking for these things and looking to see what's going on for them in this space is really, really significant. And it may not be sexual abuse. Okay, don't think that because I'm saying, the kid's acting out, so therefore it must be this. Like, don't just hone on this. A lot of these things are responses to a lot of different traumas, but they're very typical response to trauma. And I haven't experienced every single one of these, but I can tell you I've experienced a lot of them. And, you know, even still, like, depression is something I battle with. I don't have a diagnosis for it, but it's there, and I know, and I tick the boxes. That's okay, you know, because it's a normal response for the type of life that I've led and continue to live, to continue to lead. And so it's about managing, being proactive, being involved, asking the questions, and unfortunately having to respond. But it's better to have early strategies and early intervention than to just be constantly responding and reacting to what's going on. So,
and Kelly, I think a really important thing that you touched on is for adults to realize that behavior is a form of communication. That especially around trauma, a lot of teachers, oh, they're a naughty kid, or they're attention seeking. No, they're connection seeking, and they're trying to, they don't know how to let us know what's happened. So they're acting out in these ways. So, you know, children, until we get better trauma informed, you know, kids are always going to be labelled as naughty and things like that. But kids want connections, and that's why, you know, putting kids in time out and all of that sort of, it needs to be time in. They need time to, you know, you said before, it's about connections. And, you know, people that prey on children look for vulnerable children and available children. So if we can give them those connections and have that strong bond, and not think, you know, they're a naughty kid, and so we're, you know, the kids that need it the most challenge us the most.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think too, like, and again, this is not the same for every case. Like, I just put in that disclaimer in there. Like, you know, we're not saying this is the same for every single child and not the same for every single predator. Okay. But generally speaking, the majority of, okay, that's where this is coming from. But, you know, they do look for those kids who are loving and caring. And it's because they lack the ability to stand up for themselves that they choose them, because they're less likely to be outed or spoken about because of the type of child. And they prey on the most beautiful of kids. And, you know, that's where I think the tragedy really is, because you've got these amazing children that have these amazing gifts and talents, and then there's this pedophile, and I could be really nasty, but they're just preying on these really vulnerable, beautiful kids. But yeah, and I think just you said something about the labels too. Like, it's actually really important, and I'm just going to write this down on labels, live on labels, to remind me, because this is something I've taught schools and even some government agencies before, is when a child has experienced trauma, they feel dirty, they feel disgusting, they feel gross, they feel unsafe. So when we say to them, and I used this example before, is like, okay, let's say they spill like a cup of milk on the floor, right? And you say to them, oh, that's disgusting, I can't believe you just spilt that milk everywhere, oh, you're dirty, you're horrible. You are just reinforcing a label that they already feel for themselves, even though you have no intention of doing that at all by what you're saying. How you actually speak to them before is reinforcing something, and you don't know what's even going on, but that child doesn't think that they want you to clean up the milk. They actually think that you don't love them. That's the first thought. You don't love me. You think I'm dirty and disgusting. And so it's actually, and I say that because that's my experience, and I know that to be true for me and many, many kids, because I've worked with teenagers from all walks of life and all ages. And it's an inner thought process that you have no control over, but your language is so significant and important in that child that they will actually take that to be gospel. Okay, it has no relation to what you actually want them to do. You want them to clean the milk up and to sort that out and make no fuss about it. But what they hear and what you say are two different things. They hear you don't love them and you think they're dirty and disgusting. Okay, so I just was going to say, sorry, I'll encourage you that when something like that happens, give them a why, because it offsets the trauma and they can have an understanding about the reasons for what you're saying. Oh, that's so dirty and disgusting. I don't want milk on the floor because it's going to smell. Let's clean it up together so that we can all have a nice place to live in. Whatever it might be, so they understand it's not about them. It's actually about cleaning it up so it doesn't stink. Okay, so the language internally is not that the child is now believing they're not loved or safe. You know, that's not what we're aiming for. but we're very unaware of that internal process. And that's, again, that's actually a huge psychological thing, and it's actually quite in depth, but you know, having that awareness around our language towards kids is so important, especially if they, you know, experience some sort of trauma. And for teachers, you know, when a kid thinks they're in trouble, they think it's actually not just that they're in trouble, it's like the most debilitating, crippling, scary thing that they've had to experience, because if they're in trouble, they come undone. It means they're going to be unsafe, you know. So that there's so many things in that. I'm just going to we'll just do a whole new session on that, Holly.
So, Kel, what I wanted to say was, I saw a meme about this the other day, so I don't know who to quote it to, but it was a quote I credited it to, that adults' language becomes child's inner voice.
Yes.
So basically, you know, you're exactly right. The language that we use with children is so important, because, you know, when a simple one, I was 5 and I drew a picture of a tree, and the art teacher ripped it up and said, "That's not a very good tree, do it again." So now I've got in my head, I can't draw. I know it's
That's
simplistic,
right.
but that's the voice that is, you know, that's my inner voice now. And also, you know, when I'm teaching kids, I always use safe and unsafe. You know, there's programs that talk about good touch, bad touch. I never use good and bad, because, and, you know, good pictures and bad pictures. No, they're private pictures. But whenever kids hear bad, they think they're bad, and they're not bad.
No.
You know, their behavior might have been, you know, not acceptable, but they're not bad. And, you know, I can't emphasize what you've said enough, that we really need to really be careful with the language that we're using with kids, because kids are watching us all the time and they internalize everything.
Yeah.
And so we are there, you know, they're going to be their inner voice when they grow up, and we don't want that.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, particularly for parents who have like foster kids who've come out of a, you know, bad home sort of thing, these kids are already got this well embedded. And I guess when we're talking about the psychological science, so we can talk about like depression and anxiety and disassociation, there's lots of stuff that's going on there. Retraining the way that you speak and the way that these kids are thinking, it takes a lot of time, and it takes like continuous reinforcement. And we need to really sort of be aware of our own self and our own history as well, and how we're speaking, because it's our language that's then getting passed on, as you were sort of saying, Holly. Like, you know, it's not about it's about how it's making the kid feel, like whether or not you intend for that to be the way it is. That's what the kid believes, regardless. And so it's that constant reassurance. And even myself, I'm often asking myself, "Oh, did that sound okay? Did I sound like an idiot when I was speaking online?" Like, I'm an adult survivor, and like I'm nearly 39. Don't tell anyone. Oh wait, I just went alive. But I still need constant reassurance over some things, and I'm learning to let that go and to trust myself. But it's a lifelong experience, and you know, that's what's so important to have, you know, those 5 people that we always talk about. So and getting into like the mental health side of things, I say mental health because it's, you know, psychological is the study of the mind and the way that the brain thinks and all those sort of things, is if we just bundle depression and anxiety, yes, they're very different, but it's these experiences of self-worth and the shame. And, you know, Holly and I spoke briefly through our last conversation about how kids who can't give consent are sometimes coerced or manipulated, and feel like they've given permission for something to happen to them when they haven't. And so there's this element of shame that comes into the, you know, these types of manipulation and grooming and all that sort of stuff that's happening in there. So whether or not the perpetrators even said it or not, the child automatically, because of the way the brain is made, has this fear response, okay? And there's this automatic violation which has happened that they've experienced that causes them anxiety. And so I've just got written on my blog, you know, it stems from feeling unsafe and uncertain and watching for the cues of the predator, okay? So what happens with a kid who's experiencing abuse? And this is where, oh God, I could talk for hours. Now that I'm actually talking out loud about this, I can sit inside my head and write forever, and it's no big deal. But when I'm starting to talk about this, I'll get my popcorn brain is going off. And what happens, right, is you get so in tune to everything that the predator is doing. It's every look, it's every touch, it's how they stand, it's how they look, it's what they're doing with their hands, it is their mouth, it is their eyes, it is everything. So you are watching as a child what's going on. What that leads to is hypervigilance, okay? And that is being completely alert all the time. Okay, so you step into this space of anxiety and you transition into this space of being hypervigilant. So again, I think I spoke about this, it might have been in my Grow and Glow, my leadership series actually, but our bodies try to maintain this level of homeostasis. It doesn't matter if you're a child or an adult, okay? So sometimes we feel off kilter and we're like, oh, something's not right today, and we feel stressed. Well, even kids are trying to do that, okay? So our body's trying to sit here. When we have a stress response, we're sitting elevated, like we're above that line. And so when we are constantly stressed, constantly looking for our predator, looking over our shoulder, we're sitting here. That elevates all the levels of our cortisol, which is a stress hormone in the brain, and it causes us to be jumpy and flighty, and to get there. You sometimes might see kids that have like little tics and they're stressed all the time. And you're like, what the hell is wrong with that kid? It's because they're living in a stressful environment and their body is just responding. And even if they're out of the stressful environment, the stress levels don't come down because they're living in a constant state of anxiety. Okay? Your ability to bring the child down here has to come from a soft, caring, non-judgmental, safe, and loving space continuously. If they've done the wrong thing, they've done the wrong thing, but be gentle about it, because a child who's up here is going to respond with all of this stuff. They're going to be either responding with anger, displacing their anger, and it might be through criminal acts or whatever is going on, but they're heightened. And because they're living in a heightened state, they're more angry, like punching out. Like, can you see the picture that I'm painting? Holly, you would have spoken to a lot of kids that have at that level.
Yeah. And so in protective education, we teach kids about their early warning signs. It's that fight, flight, freeze, or faint response that we're all born with. And it's to try and get the kids to notice, when you're at that level, that's when you need to talk to somebody for whatever reason, whatever's happened, whether it's domestic violence or abuse or being bullied. So to identify the butterflies in the tummy, your heart racing, all of those physical sensations, and to name it. When I'm working with kids, they really understand when we call them early warning signs, and we talk about how animals show their early warning signs. And so when kids have got that label and they can recognize, and also, you're talking about, how you're always watching the perpetrator to see,
But that doesn't go away either, Holly. That's the problem.
No, that's right.
There's no predator. There's no pedophile. They're not there. It just might. And again, I think you mentioned probably 2 conversations ago about smells and the butterfly belt you talked about.
Yeah.
It can just be the smallest thing, and you're like whipping your head around.
Yeah.
The body's in that constant state, and it doesn't de-escalate. And that's where, Holly's talking about the early warning signs. You get the sweating, you get the dizziness, you get chest pains. They all come because that's an anxiety and stress response. And so, when your kids are talking about that, that's what's going on. It's as a result of stress.
So, Cal, I've heard you talk in the past about disassociation. Can you, talk to us more about that? Because I think
huge.
Yeah, I know. But I think it would really help, again, for any teachers watching, because they might think that the child is not paying attention, and again being naughty. But it's another protection, isn't it?
It is. And again, remind me to go back to PTSD, okay? Because I think it's important, and complex PTSD. But the disassociation stuff is actually, it's pretty complicated to understand, because it's like Holly's saying, if they've been naughty or whatever, when you yell at me, I will disappear. Okay, if you were someone that was going to stand over the top of me, what happens to my body? And I'll tell you, because it still happens to me. And it just takes, because I've got strategies that I can pull myself out of it. But I start to sweat, okay? I have a heart racing response because I think I've done something bad, because this is the internal language that I've been taught. And, it's nothing my mum and dad did. They're brilliant. But it's everything that's happened to me that I have learned to believe this stuff of myself. And so I get a stress response and I want to shut down and run away. Okay, so I could either do that emotionally, or I have, because of severe trauma, when trauma happens for so long, you actually can sit there and you could still be looking at me, we could still be having a conversation, and I am gone. I'm gone in my brain and I am completely disassociated. And there is nothing wrong with me except I've had a trauma response. And that's what's going on. You know, we want to label kids as having schizophrenia and, you know, all these big names for personality disorders. And so disassociation untreated can lead to some of those big things that we go, oh man, that kid's got voices in their head, they got this, they got that. That's all as a development of the disassociation type response to trauma. And so I gave an example, I think, before, and it's in my book, Unscathed Beauty. And I talk about when I was hit by a car when I was 19. And I basically floated above my body and I watched it happen like it was a movie. And you might think, you know, that's pretty crazy, but that's what happens, because what's going on for the child or the person at the time of the trauma, our coping response is to separate ourselves from our body so we don't have to physically be there. Okay, our bodies can do amazing things. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with you except you've learned a strategy, your body's implemented a strategy to help you survive. And kids that are experiencing that, because you'll see it, and sometimes at the most extreme, kids will roll their eyes back in their head. And you may see that happen, or you may see them just quickly change the topic and they're out. They're gone. Like, no, focus, back here. But they can't do it, okay? If you're wanting to get up them about something, that they're not present because they believe they're in trouble, that it's going to hurt, that, you know, so they disassociate. It's an autonomic, subconscious response to whatever they think is going to happen. So again, it's constant reassurance. It is constant validation. It is lowering your voice. It is getting them from the rear of their brain, because that's the fear response, and getting to the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking and the reasoning brain. So they need to be de-escalated. So they're in this middle part here. You can have a safe conversation about what you want to talk about. And a lot of educators won't get that. They won't understand that. And it's so significant. So again, and when we're looking at the signs of abuse, and I can pick a kid a mile away, unfortunately, who's been through a traumatic childhood experience based on the fact that I spent time learning in depth this stuff and from my own experience. But yeah, the disassociation, if you're seeing a child do that, there needs to be an intervention, because it can lead to some of those more significant mental health disorders. Because what's happening is your brain's wiring itself. Okay, and once those wired pathways are there, they're very, very difficult to change. Okay, so when we're talking about attachment issues and personality disorders, this becomes their pattern. This becomes their life. That's why Holly and I are saying 3 years old, 3, 4, 5. Gosh, I wouldn't even be 3 and 4 years old. They must learn the names of their body parts, and must learn sweaty palms and the body signals, because it means they can communicate their stress to you, and you can change or adapt your environment to respond. You know, and I think I spoke with my lovely friend Peter J the other day about her PTSD response, and she's a former law enforcement officer, and she pointed out a really important thing about you cannot heal in the same environment that caused you the trauma. There's too many triggers, there's too much around, it's unsafe, and you really owe it. Like if the child has come from or the abuse has happened in your home, and you know the kid's still living there, the perpetrator's left, the child is still going to struggle to heal in that environment. If you can sell your house, do it. If you can move to another place, do it. But the child will struggle to heal in the environment that caused them the harm. So, you know, it's creating all I'm saying is the safe space has to be there in order for the healing to start. Do you want to add into that, Holly, or have you got any thoughts on what I've said about the disassociation? Or
No, it was just fascinating to hear, you know, because I work with teachers, and you know, like you, I can sit in a class and go, well, yes, unfortunately, I think, you know, something's going on for you and something's going on for you. But sometimes teachers just label them naughty and just write them off. So
And it's hard for teachers though too, because
yeah.
you've got sometimes overpopulated classrooms. You've got 35 kids to deal with at a time. I don't envy your position in teaching those kids, and all credit to you who's out there doing that.
I just wish that part of their teaching training was trauma-informed practice.
I think I've actually attended a couple of conferences, Holly, for teachers in trauma-informed practice. So it's actually becoming more implemented. But I just feel like teachers have so much on their bloody plate already. So it's hard. But having any kind of awareness is better than having none. So teachers, if you're listening, please share. No, but please share this among your colleagues, because I would love to come and speak to your teaching group. I really, really would. And you can ask me anything. There's nothing you can't ask. So happy to do that. And I know, Holly, you speak to teachers and students all the time. So, all right. So just moving along, there's attachment issues, and look, there's a whole lot. There's ambivalent attachment. There's, gosh, what are they, Holly? There's a few types of attachments. And it's basically like, when love and trust has been violated, the kid might come to you because they need affection, and they might come to the perpetrator, but then they might run away, and you're like, I can't work this kid out. That's like ambiguous, and there's a whole lot of attachments. In fact, I probably should break that apart in a whole other. Gosh, this could be, Holly, we're going to be doing this forever. But attachments are huge, and there's actually ways to deal with that as well. So, but that's an actual psychological response. But it's about struggling to be affectionate towards others, and it stems from the trust of the individual being damaged or broken, or the boundaries being violated, and then feeling unsafe. So a lot of this comes back to the child feeling unsafe and living at a really heightened level of anxiety. So as they get older, we start looking at things like addictions. Okay, so if you could look at a pie chart of coping responses, this is how I look at it, right? Some of us are going to go towards the anxiety and depression scale, and most of the time that's going to be like the foundations of responding. You're going to have that as part of your package, unfortunately, when you're trying to respond to trauma and live as a result of, experiencing child abuse. Okay, but then there might be other stuff you might have, there might be eating disorders. And a lot of times people, let's say, you've got like a 12-year-old girl who's coming into teenage or adulthood, who's been sexually abused. They might try to make themselves look ugly to the predator. So they'll overeat, okay? They might binge eat, or they might develop an eating disorder in order to protect themselves. So it comes from how they might appear to the predator, okay? So it's self-induced weight loss through starvation or bulimia, repeated bouts of overeating. And it's just basically to appear less attractive, basically. There's neurotic reactions, the behavior where the person engages in ritualistic and overt behaviors. And that's to alleviate the anxiety, okay? So again, the tics that I was talking about, like the responses that might look a little bit strange, that's to try to shake it off. Like, can you imagine putting on something that was really uncomfortable, like a really dirty jacket that was wet and full of sand? You kind of just want to get it off, and anxiety is like that. And so you got to think about a kid's trying to just cope as best as they can. So yeah, they might act a little bit strange. And so ask yourself, why are they acting strange? Why? And ask the question, what's going on for you? Open-ended question. Okay. So there's withdrawal and mistrust. And Holly, I think I've said it before, it's sometimes, like, if you're looking at a kid who's experiencing a psychological or showing a psychological sign of abuse, it's never the same thing. It's either all one way or all another way, but it's not a particular, like it's going to be that they're just going to withdraw from a predator. Sometimes they want to spend copious amounts of time with them, and you have to think, gosh, why is that? Why do they want to spend so much time with them? Or I've been at a school before. I've just touched a student on the shoulder and they've flinched, absolutely flinched away from me, and I've gone, holy crap, sorry, and that's complete withdrawal, and they've obviously had significant abuse, and they're very big signs that something's going on. So even as young as 10, 9, maybe even 8, they might start thinking about suicide. I know, Holly, you've probably spoken to a lot of kids that have disclosed that they've wanted to kill themselves, even at a very significant and young age, and self-harming. And I'm just going to, on the self-harming, It's not just cutting your wrist. It's not cutting legs. Sometimes, and educators, this is specifically for you and anyone who's got children who've got foster care or whatever, self-harming can look like headbanging on a wall. Self-harming can look like punching a wall, okay? It's anything that stops them being numb, okay? It's an explosion of anger, but if they're doing things like hitting their heads on walls and all that sort of stuff, it doesn't just have to be cutting wrists. We just get it. Self-harming is cutting wrists. That's just the automatic association. We don't think outside of that. But it can be any of those, like throwing yourself on the ground. But they do it to release the pain that they're experiencing. They want the pain to stop, or they want to project it somewhere else.
Kelly, is it also extreme risk taking?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could look at it like that, but I think it's a bit more specific. Like extreme risk taking could be criminal elements, but I think it sort of just depends. I don't think it really is extreme risk taking. I think you could easily separate those. It's more like if you see a kid chucking a tantrum, it's kind of like that, but they're hurting themselves, they're hitting their head repeatedly, or they might get scratches or scratching their face or picking their skin or ripping. It's not risk. That's a coming out of themselves. They're so upset and frustrated. If they're going to do something obscene or risk taking, that is also coping, but it takes on a very different form, and there's an intent to get some sort of reaction from it. I think, I don't know, I'm talking off. I'm complete, guys. This is completely raw, uncut, off the cuff. Yeah, I have some notes, but this is just straight off the top of my head. So I'm not going to cover everything, but we'll get there. So yeah, I just want you to consider that self-harming is not just one thing, and definitely risk-taking forms an element of coping as well. Like there's hundreds of ways kids are going to cope, and we're not going to cover it all. They might do something really stupid. That's not even anything that I can think of, but it is what it is. If you see something that's unusual, ask them about it. That's what it comes down to, with the connection and the conversations around that. You've got to ask the questions and be brave enough to ask the questions, because often we don't want to hear the responses. So we'll push through, guys. I don't want to tap too much into the physical signs of sexual abuse, but we'll quickly go over it, because that's where you're going to probably have anything obvious. First thing I'm going to say to you is, if you see something physical, i.e. underwear with any blood or anything on it like that, you've got to see, like, don't touch it, keep it where it is, because often we won't think of it as anything other than normal, and we'll just wash clothes or whatever. Don't touch it. If you have the intentions of reporting, and I hope you do, you've got to protect the space in order to help police do their job. Okay. So just touching on the sexual abuse physical signs, and I've got a blog and I've entitled it "The Screaming Signs of Sexual Abuse," Screaming Silence of Sexual Abuse, because it is silent, it is complicated, but if you know what to look for, there's signs everywhere. Okay. And that's why, we've sort of got this, but I'm going to give you a list. Okay. And then I'm going to maybe touch on some, and maybe Holly, if you've got thoughts on any of them, just to let me know. And guys, Holly's not saying too much, because she's saying this is not her field of expertise, but I know she's spoken to so many families and children who've experienced all of these, or one or two of these things. And it's not that they're just going to have one thing. It's multiple parts, and even some things that we haven't spoken about that they will be experiencing. So physical signs, so burning sensations when they go to the toilet, or bowel movements. Okay. So if something's happening and they're being touched inappropriately, they're going to be prone to infection. It's possible that there could be some sort of bleeding. And when your kid can say to you, "This is hurting in my vagina or my penis," they can put a language around that so you understand. Okay. That's why it's so important to be able to speak about the body parts. Okay. So the physical signs, I've put self-harm and cutting again, and also the headbanging, because you can see that. Okay. This is about seeing something. Again, we don't always see anything. And in my case, you wouldn't have seen anything. I mean, I sometimes struggle because it hurt when I went to the toilet. Okay. But I didn't voice that because I was afraid to speak about it. But that's when you can ask, well, why would my kid have that experience? What's going on? Has anyone touched you? Be the first question, and it's just having an awareness about the types of things that cause those issues. Sleep disturbances and nightmares. God, I still don't sleep, but I don't get nightmares like I used to. Okay, so that's constantly living in a state of anxiety. You can't sleep well if you're hypervigilant. You can't sleep well if you're in a state of like constant alert and constant arousal. And when I say arousal, it means your body's aroused, so you're at a heightened level of cortisol. Okay. Sometimes kids will mount and hump stuffed animals and things like that. I know that sounds quite full on, but it's just it's a overt sign that they're experiencing something that they probably should have no knowledge about. So it's possible they've been exposed to some sort of pornography, or it's what they're seeing. So they may even insert certain items into themselves. Okay, you may see trauma to the breast, the bottom, or the lower abdomen, or they could get pregnant. Okay, it's a real risk, especially for female victims. If they've reached adulthood, or they can be pregnant as soon as they start bleeding or having their menstrual cycle. And so there are things to be really aware of. And I know, guys, it's a hard conversation. It's yucky, and I'm sorry for that. But if we don't have this conversation, you may even see something or hear something, like I said, that I've said, that makes you go, oh shit, I've seen that, and it might just fall into place. And I hope it doesn't. I hope there's nothing, but I do hope that if you are hearing this and something is happening, that you can actually now respond, I guess. Because guys, don't think this is easy for me. I'm struggling to have this conversation as well. But if we don't have it, I don't feel like I'm giving you the tools to do what you need to do. So Holly's mentioned a few times wetting the bed. This doesn't always happen, but sometimes they might wet their bed or soil their pants. Sometimes it's because of fear. Sometimes because of trauma in genital areas that might happen as well. So
just on that, I've been in lots of schools where children actually smear poo on the walls of the toilets and stuff like that. As a call for help.
Yeah, right. Okay. Wow, I've seen that too, but I didn't think of it like that. So that's really interesting. Okay. And guys, too, the presence of semen or sperm, obviously. Again, infections in the genital area or stained underwear. So kids might do stuff like they might have bruising around their thighs and things like that. And you might see a kid like just pulling their dress down or trying to cover their marks on their legs, and it just, listen for the song. Like if they're complaining about pain and stuff like that, like ask, and I say open-ended questions. Tell me more about that. Tell me about how that happened. By making suggestive thoughts, you're actually, if anything has happened, you could be causing further issues when they disclose. But we will talk about that in another podcast or video. But yeah, guys, like, it's just about being aware and alert, and again, having the connection with your child, because again, it comes back down to having those effective conversations. But yeah, we'll definitely be putting a trigger warning on this one because it's full on. But we've got to have these conversations. So again, this is the language of survivors. Okay, this is the language they speak. It is not spoken in words. And I advocate for this highly, is that there is a dialogue, that if you don't understand the language, you're not going to be able to respond. And I don't know, Holly, but when we see these kids, they have the same patterns. Like you would know from the kids you've spoken to and the families you've spoken to, they all have very similar traits, regardless of the type of experience that they've had. Don't you agree?
Yeah.
So like the withdrawal patterns and the self-harming, and it's all there. It's all part of it. And I guess it puts the response onto us to go, what is that about? And what's going on? So we can choose to ask, or we can choose to ignore. And I guess that's where we have to make a decision. So I'll just very quickly, I'm going to run through some last few things, and this is about the
Just before you go on to the next one,
yeah.
Unfortunately, I've been in communities where kids have got STIs,
Oh,
as
yeah.
young as 5, both in their vagina and in their eyes.
Yeah.
And so, there's only one way a child gets an STI.
Yeah, that's right. Look, there's a lot in the next section, so I'm just going to skim over it, to be honest. And hang on, I don't even know what. Stand by. So this is basically behavioral. Okay, so behavioral signs, and we already mentioned a few. So we talked about self-harming, talked about withdrawal, and there's lots of things that cross over. But again, you're never going to have one thing without another. Okay, there's going to be multiple things. So withdrawal is huge. Because they feel unsafe, they just withdraw. Okay, if they shower frequently, all right, the kid wants to wash themselves because at the end of the day, they feel dirty. So if they're trying to rip their clothes off and they're trying to get rid of something, ask yourself why, okay? They know a lot about stuff they shouldn't know, like sexual stuff. And they might talk about it. You might not have shown them. And if you haven't shown them, you have to ask yourself, why do they know this? Okay, so they might do things in drawings or play. Like I talk about in my book how I used to play with Barbie and Ken in the sandpit. Well, they were always naked and there was a lot of sexual stuff going on. And my mum was never sitting there with me in the sandpit. It was just what I did. And I remember it very clearly. And I thought, wow, had somebody known about that, maybe they would have asked me or could have asked me. Okay. So watch what they're doing, watch what they're writing, watch what they're talking about. Okay. Feelings of anger. So delinquent behaviors. I talked about that. Again, it's like a pie graph, right? A pie graph of responses to trauma. And it might be delinquency, and it might be drugs, it might be self-harm, or it could be a bit of everything. Okay, and so it's anything that's not normal for your kid. So that could be physically violence. They might act out, they might hit people. Just think of it like a pot of water that's boiling. Okay, you stick the lid on and you try to hold that lid down, it's going to come out somewhere, and it might be anger, it might be hurting themselves, or it might be screaming or yelling or hitting their head against a wall. Okay, so unfortunately, we have to respond to that, and it makes it hard. Changing the eating habits, so they either don't want to eat or they overeat. Again, they might want to make themselves look ugly to the perpetrator. Ask yourself why. Nightmares, suicidal ideation. Again, a kid who's 10 shouldn't be wanting to kill themselves, but they just want to escape the situation. Okay, it's not necessarily that they want to end their life, but that's the only way they can see that it's going to stop what's going on. Okay, so ask yourself, if they're wanting to kill themselves, geez, what's actually going on? What's happened? And maybe for them, there's been kids who want to mimic something that's currently going on. They're like, oh, I'm just going to do that, and it's off the cuff comment that doesn't mean anything. But I think you have to investigate. If a kid says they want to kill themselves, ask questions. Okay, ask questions, make them feel safe, and ask questions, because yes, it could be off the cuff, it could be because they've heard something, and it's like, I don't know, these kids get on these bloody rampages and these trends, and they're like, oh, I'm just going to do this and I'm going to do that, I'm watching this, or they're following some crazy YouTube person that's doing something horrible to other people. You just don't know, but you've got to ask the questions. I talked earlier about disassociation and voices and stuff like that. There's actual things like imaginary friends are real. They're not imagined. That's the kids' way of having a conversation, having someone to talk to. Maybe they've developed this persona to offset what they're struggling with. It's just another coping strategy. We could do a whole session on overly compliant behavior and people pleasing. Okay, it's just huge because they don't want to upset the apple cart. They want everybody to like them. They're so used to saying yes. Okay, it's massive. But yeah, there's the drug and alcohol use, prostitution, and again, you might think, gosh, my kid would never do that, but all it takes is one session on the internet for someone to say, hey, I'll give you $50 into your account if you take your shirt off. I'm like, oh, I got $50 for taking my shirt off. So what are you going to give me if I take my pants off? Okay, so they might end up, your kid might have like $500 sitting in their wallet, and you're like, where the hell did you get $500 from? And so you have to ask yourself, like, why have they got that? And so sometimes they get groomed into this space where, you know, they might take food or lollies or gifts or money to do sexual things. And it might be just a show. Oh, just take a photo, because they don't know where that photo is going. They don't know that it's going to be like sent across the internet to like 50, 100,000 million pedophiles. Okay, they don't know that because they're just thinking, I just want the thing. Okay, and so that's where we have to ask questions about when they're getting money or gifts or unexplained things that we just wouldn't have any sort of idea about. There's fear of adults the same sex as the abuser. So if maybe they don't want to talk to, maybe it's a female abuser, maybe they don't like any women. Ask yourself why. Okay, poor relationships with peers, massive lack of boundaries, and hiding what they're doing. So they might be online, and again, it might be like the $50 thing, okay, but they won't let you look at their account. So, you know, we're going to do a whole session on cyber safety, but you must somehow have access to your child's account until they're 18 and they can make those decisions for themselves. I mean, it's up to each individual parent, but there's so much that can happen on the internet. And again, I probably have missed a lot. We need to wrap up. And I know, Holly, you probably haven't said too much in this one, but we both, by sharing this stuff, our heart is to just really empower you guys. Did you want to ask anything, Holly? Have you got any thoughts on anything?
Kel, I just wanted to thank you. I acknowledge that you've spoken most about this, but it's because, you know, you have personal history around it and you've spoken so openly. And, you know, in fact, I've just got goosebumps because, you know, the gift that you're giving people, because, you know, and to acknowledge that, you know, you have been triggered and yet you're still pushing through to do this because, you know, we're both so passionate about, you know, reducing the rate. We can't stop it completely. We've said it in every podcast, every episode we've done, but we can, you know, by you sharing your story. And that's why I'm happy to sit back and just let you speak from the heart, because that's what's going to get people to understand why this is so important. So yeah. I want to thank you.
Oh, thanks, Holly. And I guess it's why we're teaming up, because we do have different levels of expertise in certain areas. And guys, I'm sharing from my own experience, and I don't think a lot of people are going to do that openly, and that's okay. And this is not like everybody's not going to get out and come and do this, and I understand that. Like, being brave looks differently for everybody, but this is my heart, my passion, and my mission. And yeah, it's going to hurt a little bit, but it'll only hurt until it doesn't hurt. So, you know, I'll give that to you, and I give that to you with the heart that, you know, I hope if something's going on that you will pick up on it now that I've shared some of these things. And you can go to my website, www.kellyhumphries.com, and go to my blog and scroll down. There's so much information that I have there, and I will at some point, don't quote me on a date, but I will put it together in an ebook, and I'll get that out somehow. But, you know, we owe it to our kids and our families to be empowered with these conversations, and Holly and I are just going to keep showing up. Did you just want to give out your details, Holly, and we'll tie this one up?
Thank you. If you want to find out more about protective education, my Facebook page is just Safe 4 Kids. We've got a lot of free information on my YouTube channel, and so it's Safe 4 Kids is my website as well, and yeah, we'll just keep going with this, and I look forward to being Kelly's psychic.
Yeah, I know, I love it. I love our relationship, Holly. It's beautiful. Guys, if you've got thoughts, comments, questions, we maybe did miss something. If you want to throw it in the feed, again, just please remember, we are off the cuff. We're doing this raw. If you have something you want to get cranky at us, please do it in a private message. Okay. We're just absolutely trying to do our best. But I pray that you've got something out of this. And I thank you so much for watching, if you're watching. And please, please, please share. You do not know what someone is going through at the moment. Maybe they can get something from this as well. So thank you again. This is Talk and Tell with Holly and Kel. Sending much love to you guys.